Good evening, good evening, good evening, good evening, and good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Weather Brains episode number 708. And you know what this is? It's the pre show, that magical time of the program where we share boring personal stories, humorous anecdotes, and we say outrageous things. This is for Monday, August 12th, 2019. And let me get the embed code in place for a couple of spots here. And then we'll bring on our regulars and our guests this evening. And we're slowly but surely figuring out Zoom, which is our new platform here. So now we are going to bring up the chat and manage participants, and we are going to invite people. So here we go. And for those that are new, we have switched video platforms. Google Hangouts over the air went away at the 1st of August. So we have switched over to a new provider, and it seems to be working pretty well. So this is where I come in and invite our regulars. Should be a good show tonight. I want to say we're talking about Hurricane Camille. I do believe that is correct. Let me be sure I got everybody. I think we got everybody. So let me send the invitation. And just like that, they should have it now. And I'm using two browsers, which is thoroughly confusing. We have struggled with the correct browser to use for the various video platforms. For this, I think Chrome seems to be a little better than Safari. I typically use Safari as my daily driver in terms of a browser. It's got a lower memory footprint. It's privacy. It's just for me. It's not for everybody. And again, sometimes I'll bring up Chrome. So now let's see if anybody else will join me on the show here. And if not, I'll be babbling for 90 minutes about stuff. By the way, for those watching live, I will be in Starkville, Mississippi tomorrow, speaking to the annual summer workshop for those in the broadcast meteorology program at Memorial Hall. Let's see, I think I'm up at 10:30. And if by chance you're in Starkville and not even a part of that, come by and say hello. Yeah, 10:30 is my slot for tomorrow at the summer workshop, and that'll be a ton of fun. I will be in Oxford, Alabama, Saturday the 17th, this Saturday, for a book signing. Well, we got Bill Murray on the show.
Hello.
Say something, James, man.
You hear me okay?
Yep. So we got to do some negotiation here.
All right, that one.
So I found out that Alabama has a home football game on this Weatherfest day.
Yes, it does. At 4
So you didn't
o'clock.
tell me that.
I didn't think about it because I can't go. You shouldn't get to go either.
Let me see what I could do.
It's at 4 o'clock, I think, James.
Yeah, let me let me kind of do some looking at that schedule here. Okay. You know, I got to speak like Sunday morning at like the crack of dawn. They've got me in that first session, yeah, at like 8:30 or something like that, and then I've got a session Sunday afternoon. I want to say it's in the student session with Kevin Laws. But anyway, we'll figure something out. We always do. I just need a helicopter is what I need. So
yeah, I'm sure we can find somebody to sponsor that.
Anybody has a chopper, you know, we can fly a banner behind the chopper, give you some free advertising or something.
That's a good idea. Really good.
So I think I've invited everybody, all the regulars
Yeah, I
here.
think I invited everybody else again. So there's Kevin.
Kev.
And I won't keep doing some accounting here. Y'all keep talking. I'm listening.
Hey, Bill, this is James. Can you hear us okay?
I can hear you loud and clear. How about me?
Ooh,
Yeah.
ooh, perfect.
Not
Coming
bad
in
for a
loud.
computer illiterate guy.
5 by 9, as we say in the ham radio business.
Oh, yeah.
So, Kevin, can you hear us okay? Yo, Kev. Can you hear us, Kevin? I don't think Kevin can hear a word we're saying.
Doesn't sound like it.
Not hearing Kev. Thumbs up if you can hear us. Can you hear us? Looks like he's got his TV earpiece in. Maybe he's not even paying attention here.
He's ignoring us. I'm sitting here. The National Weather Association Foundation.
Writing a check to them or on their account for somebody else?
No, not to them. For Brad Travis's golf tournament. And our sponsorship.
Oh, Kevin.
Yes,
Can you
hello.
hear us?
There we go.
Well, now we can hear you. What did you do?
I have not done this yet other than that test, so I had to show it the Yeti microphone and set my audio.
Okay. You're 5 by 9. You got Bill 5 by 9, Bill 5 by 9.
Dr. Halverson, fun. Maybe. He and I had a great test. Dr. Halverson, can you hear us?
Oh, of course. Hi.
There we go. All right, we got a
Brady
quorum.
Bunch is the Brady Bunch is filling up here. Dr. Halverson, where are you located tonight? Where are you?
I'm in Olney, Maryland, just north of DC.
Okay. And Bill, you're down in Galveston or Houston?
League City, which is in Galveston County.
Okay.
Probably
Awesome.
the biggest city in the area that nobody's ever heard of. Over 100,000 folks live here.
And I've got a song I can play for you. Bill, I'm going to play this. Let me play this and see if you've heard of this song before. I'm just going to play a snippet. While I watch the cannons crashing.
Is there anyone who hasn't heard that song?
Aubrey would never have heard it had she not been on this show. She's not old enough.
Maybe.
Glenn Campbell, lineman for the county.
And Aubrey was her name.
That's my song.
Aubrey's only 24. She would not have.
Oh my gosh, I wish. Oh my gosh, if I was on 20 or if I was only 24 again. Whew,
And you
really,
knew then what you knew now, right?
we really need that bail money, guys.
That's a show title right there, which we can't use.
I think we've used it. I think we've used that one a handful of times.
I think we have.
Repeat.
So we're going to talk about the heat wave tonight, huh?
99 in Birmingham today.
101 for the 5th day in a row here.
With a heat index of 183.
It seemed like it. There's been little wind.
105 Camp Mabry in Austin today.
What's the dew point out there, Bill? Mid 70s?
Yeah, at night it goes up to about 79 and then it mixes down to 76, the heat of the day.
Whew.
Yeah.
Nasty.
Played golf Saturday and it was like the Corregidor Death March, the last 9 holes.
At least this is August and not June. We know
Yes.
September.
That's why I tell everyone it's expected to be like this time of year.
It is. And I can handle the heat in August knowing that October is within sights here.
Yeah, our average high starts going back down tomorrow.
There you go. So I have put the right embed code on live.bigbrainsmedia. So I think we're good here.
To wait on television?
I think Kim's coming, isn't she?
Yeah,
Gonna pass-
I have invited her via email. The only way to invite here is, but there's John and there's Kim. Everybody's here. The Brady Bunch is the Hollywood Squares were full here.
Hey, Kim, how you doing?
Hey, doing well. How are you doing? I'm trying to see which square you're even in. Actually, I don't think I can see you.
Yeah, you have to look on the Brady Bunch, the Hollywood Squares version, Kim. Dr. Howard.
Over there's-
Oh gosh, there's a guy I have not seen in a
I
long.
know, Jeff.
Where is Dr. John? Oh my! Look at you. You still have a full head of hair. I cannot believe it.
Dude,
Hair
Wow.
of an angel.
How
The
did you
hair
do
of an
that?
angel.
3 things, Jeff. Water, chocolate milk, and beer.
I remember a time long ago you were extolling the virtues of low cholesterol and multigrain and all this, and now we're up to chocolate and beer, right?
It works. It works. Oh, it's good to see you. It's been a long time.
It has been a long time. For those of you who don't know, John and I were grad students together at UVA, and he led me by a couple of years, and he went up to NASA Goddard to take a postdoc up there, and then I came up there to take a postdoc up there, and the rest is history.
That's right. I didn't follow you to Baltimore County, though, except to watch the Orioles play, but I'm not even doing that now.
You're still in Pennsylvania, right?
Yeah, Lancaster.
Yeah, that's a beautiful area up there. Good for you.
Absolutely. Yeah, you can always tell the wind direction by the manure.
No.
Another show title.
That was definitely a show title.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, we have to wait 2 minutes until 30 after, then we can start here.
I almost want to make a T-shirt out of that one. Listen to Weather Brains. You can smell the manure. Wow.
Yeah. All right. Let's see here.
I really do enjoy our Brady Bunch format. The more that I see it, it's just fun.
Do we figure out what the max number is that we can have in here? I know we can only get 9 on the Brady Bunch screen here, but how many can we have on at a time? Do we know?
I don't know.
So
One way to find out, we can just keep inviting random people until we fill it up,
There you go.
Do it. Challenge accepted.
You used to do that in the early days of the Google Plus thing. We
did.
get some guest on named Joe Smith, and James would invite 17 Joe Smith to Google Plus until the right one showed up.
Yeah, I think the way this works, you guys can control the way you see people on your, box there. But when I do it, that's what YouTube sees. So I am in the full Brady Bunch Hollywood Squares mode right now. But when the show starts, I'll go back to the mode where the speaker goes full screen.
We'll have chat. That's good.
We have a chat, which is available for everybody. We can drop stuff in there, and we are 13 seconds away.
Can you mute people as the host, James?
Yes, I can.
Loud typers and things.
Yes, and this is much better. And welcome, by the way, to those watching on television. This is Weather Brains. It's Monday night, and we're about to hit the show live here. But yes, I can mute anybody, and the controls are much better than the Hangouts controls. So, all right, here we go. Let's get this thing going here. Let's record channel 1. And let's record channel 2. And here we go in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. It's Weather Brains. This is episode number 708. the weekly show all about weather. This is for August 12th, 2019, the old dog days. Are we out of dog days? I lose track of.
They ended yesterday.
Okay.
Down the thermometer, though.
I missed that.
So welcome. It's good to have you watching or listening. And I would like to say hello to Kim. Kim, welcome. We missed you last week.
Yeah.
Welcome back.
Thanks. I missed you guys too, but I got to do something pretty fun with my time at least.
I was about to say now, we're going to do a debrief right here. So you need to do a little show and tell of where you were last week.
Yeah, so this was one of the most random of life events, but I got to speak at the United Nations in New York City. Yeah, which is pretty cool. I was invited by there was a workshop for, believe it or not, the Lake Chad Basin region of Africa, which I saw the invite, and at first I thought it was spam. And I looked at it and I went, oh, well, because it's literally the Nigerians, right?
They wanted you to send them money.
And you get from their bank account, your bank account, right?
But then they persisted in sending me invitations, and I noticed that it actually was coming from one of the vice presidents at OU, and I'd been introduced to her through Jeff Kimple, who'd been the director of the Severe Storms Lab. One thing went to another, and she was just really interested in my work and having a behavioral scientist come and be part of a panel at a workshop for this basin. And you might have heard about the region. It's a place in Africa where Lake Chad is this very prominent lake bordering Nigeria, Niger, a couple other countries. And it's recently shrunk over the last couple of decades. It's about 90% of it's gone. And this has placed enormous pressures on the population. It's where Boko Haram is now operating, in part because of all the pressures that that has placed on the region. So they were talking about being resilient to things like drought and water crisis, and how to reach communities and help them to become resilient in the face of weather extremes. So some of the things that we're doing translate. It was really, really interesting. When I spoke, there were people who spoke all kinds of different languages in the audience. So they had those little earpiece things, that you hear the translators through. Yes. And when people from Nigeria and Chad and so on were speaking, I listened, and I could dial in. You can dial in and listen to different languages and stuff on the little system, and it's really fun. So I was like the 5-year-old there, just pressing buttons and right. Representing us very, very well.
So Kim gets to speak at the United Nations. I'm at the East Boga Rotary Club. We will discuss this more in detail in just a little bit, Kim, but that's awesome. That is a marvelous experience. We have the man with the hair of an angel, Dr. John Scala from Lancaster, Pennsylvania. John, your hair is looking good tonight.
Oh, thank you very much. A lot of chocolate milk today, so maybe that's why. Hey, I wanted to share with you what I was doing last week. So if this comes up, this is what I was looking at every morning.
Ah, amazing.
Wow.
So this is Seneca Lake, up in the Finger Lakes of New York. So it was spectacular to witness this on a daily basis. Really amazing.
Wow.
Aubrey, weren't you in that same area here recently?
Yes, I certainly was. I had a wedding up there on Geneva on the lake is where I was. But yes, on Seneca Lake. And I wasn't up early enough for the sunrises, but we caught a couple of really nice sunsets on the lake. And it was spectacular.
Awesome.
That's quite the place up there, Aubrey. That's the high end.
It was quite the high end wedding.
Oh yeah, we drove by and waved.
Yeah,
that's known for a particular type of beer called Genesee beer up in that area.
Yeah, that's a Rochester trademark.
There you go. Okay.
Yeah. So Kevin, what did you do on your summer vacation?
None of those things. I do have breaking news though.
Uh-oh.
Have internet back?
Stand by, ladies and gentlemen.
We interrupt this program for a CBS Radio Net Alert Bulletin.
Well, we all know, anybody who's listened to this program for any length of time, how many audio bits my son Matthew has done for this show. That little boy. And tomorrow he goes off to college.
Oh,
Wow.
Wow.
James has got his hand on his head.
Unbelievable. So we played one of his bits last week.
Oh, did you?
here.
Good.
We did it. In fact, just to honor him, and considering the fact that this is August, ladies and gentlemen, we have to pause for this breaking news.
We interrupt this program for a CBS Radio Net Alert Bulletin.
From the newsroom inside worldwide headquarters of Weather Brains International, this is a heat emergency update.
Okay, stand by live, stand by graphics, stand by effects, stand by cameras 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. Stand by HD Superjet Copter 17, microwave truck and satellite feeds locked. Cancel mix minus to talent. We're live in 3, 2, and cue announce.
We go live now to our reporter who is live on the scene.
It's hot. Stay inside, have a drink of water, and get over it.
I like that.
There you go. So that little boy's on his way. He's going to be attending the University of Texas at Dallas as a business and marketing major, and we're real proud of him. And he's going, believe it or not, on a full scholarship.
Wow.
Oh, then you can help me. I'm sending 2 kids to school this month.
I'll start sending you checks now then, John.
Thank you very much.
We're real happy for him, and we just appreciate being able to announce that.
Oh,
that's awesome. He's been a part of this show for a long time. All right, Bill Murray, let's bring in our guest. I'm excited about this show tonight.
Yeah, it just got covered up with a heat advisory. Hold on a second. This week marks the anniversary of one of the most terrible hurricanes in American history.
Show title.
Yeah,
show title.
Yeah, that definitely is going to qualify right there. It's one that had a lot to do with why I'm fascinated with weather. Probably you too, James Spann. James, what do you remember about Hurricane Camille?
I was 13 years old in 1969, and my prized possession was a little transistor radio. That was my basically window to the world, especially after dark, when all of a sudden you could pick up Skywave from different parts of the United States. It was fun during the day to, hear the top 40 stations. But on that night, I latched on to the blowtorch in New Orleans, WWL 870. And it came in so well. And it was in the summer. I was at my grandmama's house, and I stayed up all night, just fascinated by their coverage, listening to this man by the name of Nash Roberts, who was the longtime meteorologist there. And I literally stayed up until the sun was up and the station faded away. And to this day, I look at what we have and we take it for granted. But still, that night was very precious to me. And I think that started a really keen interest in weather. I was interested, but that really turned me on that night. That was a great night.
Yeah, I was 7 at the time and had gone through the GES tornado in Birmingham, West End, 1968. It was really my first, significant weather recollection. But I can remember we were going that morning somewhere to visit someone and listening on the radio and just being really, concerned, that's coming, because it sounded like a horrible storm, and obviously it was even worse than what they thought at the time. But that's pretty amazing. We're going to walk through Hurricane Camille tonight because this is the anniversary. Tonight's Guess Weather Brain number 1 actually deserves his own show, and he's going to get it soon. But we thought he would bring an important angle to tonight's discussion and talking about the flooding aspect of Camille in Virginia. Dr. Jeff Halverson has his PhD from University of Virginia, is professor in the Geography and Environmental Sciences Department, Systems Department at the University of Maryland, Baltimore County. He writes the monthly highlight columns each month in Weatherwise magazine. Dr. Halverson, welcome to the show.
Hey, I'm really happy to be on this group chatting. And I want to make an interesting point that a few days after Camille's landfall in the Gulf Coast, let's not forget about Woodstock up in upstate New York, right?
Wow.
The reason I bring that up, though, is that there were heavy rains, as you know, that turned that whole music festival into a mud bowl and a mud bath. And one of the things I suspect, and I need to look at this in a little more detail, is that those rains up in upstate New York may be connected to that storm by something we call a predecessor rain event, or a P-R-E. So there's some food for thought.
There you go. That's exactly right. So I actually read some of my great books about Hurricane Camille. You mentioned one earlier, Bechtel's book, a couple other ones, Camille, Category 5, and another book, that was the Woodstock. And of course, and there were servicemen on the Gulf Coast, on the Mississippi Gulf Coast, that were trying to get leave to go up there that weekend to see that event. So we can't wait to hear your discussion about the impacts of Camille in Virginia after it had written headlines all along the Gulf Coast. But we're glad you're with us tonight, Dr. Halverson. Thank you.
Thank you.
And guess Weather Brain number 2 tonight is a longtime friend of the show, one of our most frequent contributors. One of 2 former directors of the National Hurricane Center on the show. Oh, wait a minute. Neil Frank backed out. Doggone it. So anyway, we got you, Bill Reed, and that's all we need. You've been in our thoughts and prayers lately, Bill. Hope you're feeling back up to speed after your recent little bout, but we're glad you're with us tonight. So now, Bill, you started your career in 1977 in the Weather Service, right? But
my start was almost 5 years on active duty in the Navy.
So you weren't around in '69 though by that point, were you?
I was just getting ready to return from a summer job with DuPont in Delaware for my junior year at A&M when Camille occurred.
So were you already with the weather bug at that point?
Oh gosh, yeah, I majored in meteorology. I had it since I was 8 years old. It's a defective gene.
It really is. We need the gene splicing tool to help us out. But if you go back Thursday, August 14th, there was a Navy recon plane, checking out a tropical wave in the Caribbean. And, from what I've always read, the story was that it found a rapidly intensifying depression that became a storm while it was still in the area, 60 miles west of Grand Cayman, moving to the west-northwest at 12 to 14 miles an hour. Bill, talk about recon back then, what it was about and how it worked and what it was like.
Well, it's kind of fun. I actually did recon my first 2 years in the Navy. And I was trained by a meteorologist who had been on board for most of the Navy flights on the night flights in the Camille. Back then, the Navy flew all their flights down at below cloud base, which got a little dicey at night.
I would imagine.
With these big floodlights in the belly of the plane to look at. And the challenge they had in Camille, the Navy was supposed to do most of the Gulf, from what I understood back then. They changed that after that. But they're flying these old Super Connies, which were older than any of the people flying the planes. And they were, the good planes had been deployed out to the Eastern Caribbean for a research mission. I think it was probably a Project Storm Fury type mission. And they were waiting to catch the next system that was going to stay out in the Atlantic. So the planes that they had to use were affectionately like hangar queens. They weren't in the best of shape. And they had a lot of problems with the maintenance issues of trying to fly Camille. But the patterns were not that different than the ones we fly today, other than they were flown low level like that. And the other problem with the Connie was it wasn't all that powerful airplane. So when you got in the really strong winds like Camille had, you couldn't do the full penetration into the center because you're going sideways faster than forward, and you had issues of control of the aircraft.
Yeah, that does not sound like any fun, Bill Reed.
Well, I thought it was great. It was Six Flags for meteorologists.
Were those Connie's piston engine or turboprop engine? Probably piston engine, right?
Yeah, they were piston. And at the time by the time I went in the squadron, which was 71, they were getting about 90 hours out of a rebuilt engine before they started having troubles with them. But they were getting ready to transition into the P3s by then.
Yeah, that's pretty amazing. So now, Jeff, you and Dr. Scala knew each other and were around the Simpsons. And of course, Dr. Simpson was the head of the Hurricane Center at that point. What did he have at his disposal in terms of satellite data then? Do y'all know?
not too much. And I
That was the early, very early period of satellites.
It was polar orbiters. You had the ESA 8 and 9, I guess, were the newest ones then. So they were getting the 4 to 8 images a day, but you didn't have any good navigation on them, so you're having to hand plot the latitude and longitude overlays on it. And I think the anticipated error could be anywhere from 20 to 40 miles on locating the center off of those images. Didn't have the geostationary yet.
And of course, we didn't have Dvorak technique back then, right?
Right. It was mid-70s before it was published.
That's right.
And so I guess having that big of a discrepancy in the center location could lead to some huge errors in terms of direction of movement too, right?
Oh yeah. The initialization was totally dependent on if you had a good recon flight and you had a good fix on the center, a much more accurate one and more confidence, and especially if you had them a track record of them over a 12 to 24 hour period, so you could get some continuity on the positions for the motion, since you weren't able to drive that off of satellite. And it was fairly common in that era to lose storms out in the open Atlantic between missions. Wow. And you're called hurricane hunters for a good reason back then. Sometimes you were out there flying blue sky where they sent you and have to go somewhere else to find the storm.
You can't take that for granted, can you? Right there, I tell you what, the fact that we have such incredible data today, and what they were dealing with there. But by Friday morning, it was already hurricanes heading toward western Cuba, and forecast to cross over Cuba, and then you lose a little bit of strength, but rapidly intensify over the Gulf. Jeff, have you looked at the meteorology of Camille a good bit to why it intensified so rapidly?
I've looked at the meteorology of the post-tropical phase after it made landfall and why it roared back to life 2.5 days later. I have not looked at this system as a Cat 5 in the Gulf, so I'm not that knowledgeable about that. So we'd have to pass the baton to others on this Brady Bunch panel.
Yeah.
Well, you could tell from their write-ups, or the post-storm write-ups, that it had what they considered was a highly favorable environment. In other words, there was a lot of deep tropical moisture surrounding it, so they didn't know about any way to measure dry air intrusions and things like that, but they were fairly confident from the flight data that the moist and unstable atmosphere part of it was pegged. The wind shear was very light, and it had there was apparently the upper level low up to the northwest of it was helping to generate a really good outflow on that side. And as you can see on that image, it was very symmetrical.
Yeah, it reminds me of Andrew being so symmetric, like a buzzsaw. This is
Bill.
Go ahead,
John.
This is a Nimbus 3 satellite image from August the 16th, 1969, one of the early satellites that gave us sort of a geostationary view of this. But I'll jump ahead a little bit. I've talked to folks in the Gulf Coast after Katrina, and they stayed through Katrina because they survived Camille and thought that nothing could be as bad as Camille, so why am I leaving?
Yeah, we experienced that directly, and we were on the coast the day before Camille as well. Brian Peters and I interviewed people in St. Louis that we couldn't believe were still there at 7 p.m. that Sunday night, just having a leisurely meal in the Burger King. And that's exactly what they said to us. And it always troubled me, how many of those people made it through the night and the next.
It happens almost all the time. If you're reading some of the accounts from Camille of people who chose to stay, they had stayed for Betsy 4 years earlier and suffered no serious consequences, and they just assumed it wouldn't be any worse than that.
So, Bill, in addition to the intensity issue, and I didn't realize this until yesterday, y'all remember Eric Janson, who was on the show a couple of weeks ago. He did a graphic in Biloxi last night that he sent to me, and the track forecast, even 2 days out, kept going to Florida, even when it was just south of really Gulfport. On the 17th, he said, and it was Florida. Can you talk about that track error?
Yeah, I think Yeah, that's really interesting because that created a lot of disinformation.
Well, yeah, that was going to be my follow-up is I know you weren't there, Bill, but the media coverage at the time, and wherever you were, you probably didn't get as much, but it would be interesting to know the media coverage at that time.
From what I actually, that book, Category 5, mentioned the media coverage and how most of the New Orleans stations really weren't covering it other than there's a hurricane in the Gulf and it's supposed to go to Florida. Keep in mind, back then, the average 24-hour error was about 130 miles.
Right.
And the 48-hour error was somewhere on the order of 350 miles.
That is unbelievable. Wow.
I mean, it must have been, I would have been depressed and on suicide watch if I had been hurricane forecasting.
And I wonder why it's not, the hurricane's not really talked about very much. And that, for some reason, that may be part of it. That along the way, that was an extremely hard hurricane to forecast.
So here's what I want to know. Does anyone know if this storm underwent a rapid intensification or a rapid deepening in the Gulf? Did it get over?
Oh, yeah. It rapidly intensified south of Cuba. And as soon as it came off Cuba, apparently it started rapidly intensifying again.
Okay.
Almost every storm that gets to a Category 3 or higher has gone through some phase of rapid intensification in its life cycle.
How much sea surface temperature did we have back then, Bill? And did it come into play at all in terms of analyzing a storm? It's probably certainly didn't from a numerical weather prediction process, did it?
I don't know if we had the no, it wasn't, not even, it was. It's been much more recently since sea temperature have been incorporated into models, but and it was probably a much coarser analysis. They probably didn't have the as good an analysis of the eddies back then as we have now. But keep in mind, it was middle August, so the Gulf, the heat content was not an issue.
Yeah, right.
There's plenty of now, just like now.
Did Dr. Simpson ever talk to you, Dr. Scala, Jeff, about this hurricane? Did he ever share any insight?
I interviewed him and talked with him about the post-tropical phase over Virginia, over the mid-Atlantic, but we never had any conversations about this particular.
Wow.
That was like music to accompany my dialogue.
There you go. That came from my direction. Thank you very much.
John, did he ever have any conversations with you about the Gulf phase?
Jeff, not on Camille specifically. I had some really entertaining conversations with Bob Simpson about the early days of the Hurricane Center and when he took over as being the first director. And we also talked a little about naming hurricanes early on and the shift from just female names to becoming now a male and female names.
Right.
Those early years were fascinating conversations with him.
Yeah.
I bet. So, and is the myth true? And it may not be a myth. Bill Reed, you probably know. You may know, gentlemen. My Dr. Simpson scholars. Is it named for John Hope's daughter? Did he submit his daughter's name as a name to the WMO to be on the hurricane list? And did that really happen, or is that a made-up story?
Do you know, Bill?
No, I don't know.
I heard the same story, but I can't tell you for sure.
It's not. It would not surprise me.
Right,
A lot of those names have a personal connection to somebody at the Hurricane Center.
Yeah.
Bill is not for me, by the way.
It certainly is one of the most unique hurricane names for sure. There seemed to be a real, from the literature that I've read, there seemed to be a real distrust in New Orleans of the U.S. Weather Bureau. And it seems to go back in some ways to the famous 1957 hurricane, Audrey, in southwestern Louisiana. Anybody want to comment on that?
On Audrey?
No, just on the southeastern Louisiana feeling sort of left out by the Weather Service in those days, the Weather Bureau. And it came to light in this Camille book, this Category 5 book, because there was a boat captain who was involved in local government in Plaquemines Parish, who found out on Saturday morning, the oil rigs were moving all their people onto shore, And he thought this hurricane was going, to Florida. He had read, the night before, heard news reports, whatever. And, when he plotted the points himself, he believed it was coming towards southeastern Louisiana. So he called the Weather Bureau of New Orleans and said, "Hey, what's up?" And in this book, the authors say that he would never say what happened and that conversation with the Weather Bureau, but he, was very happy with the result and talked to his local government officials, and they ordered an evacuation of Plaquemines, knowing that it would take well over 24 hours to get all the people out. And of course, you go back and look at the final report. It says, hey, 17,900 people were evacuated from Plaquemines, without incident. But he said if they had waited till Sunday morning, that would have never happened. And they could have never gotten anyone out. And there's no telling how many lives were saved, because of that responsibility. And from what I can tell, in any of the local statements from the Weather Bureau in New Orleans, no evacuations were ever mentioned.
Back then, there was no plan to evacuate New Orleans back then. The local officials there didn't think it could be done anyway, so they didn't even have a plan for it.
The population must have been a whole lot different in 1960.
Yeah, we're very fortunate that we've improved our skill in forecasting enough that decisions on evacuation can be made in beyond 36 hours and not under 24 like happened in Camille.
But it wouldn't have taken much more of a jog to the left, a little bit more of that ridge to the north of it, and that hurricane could have been, even closer to New Orleans, and it would have been.
What was the condition of New Orleans back in the 50s? Had there been so much land subsidence that it was, maybe it was not as lower below sea level as it was today, because that subsidence has been an ongoing thing for decades there.
What caused the flooding from Betsy? Was it from freshwater rainfall flooding, or did it?
No, Betsy was storm surge in the 9th Ward in Chalmette. It was long enough ago that people had kind of forgotten that when Katrina did its thing.
Well, they still were not doing a good job with issuing evacuations back in 2005 when we were down there that night. Brian Peters and I were appalled at some of the talk we heard out of New Orleans on that Saturday night. It was pretty depressing. So, he would never say what he said to the weather, what the Weather Service or the Weather Bureau in New Orleans said to him. And even 30 years later, he was pretty sanguine about it. I wonder what they said to him. That there is no evacuation plan?
Well, the Weather Service never had the authority to say anything about evacuation. So, and I don't think there was anywhere near the amount of, there wasn't the structure of emergency management that is remotely similar to what we have now. So I don't think you had the deep ingrained coordination going on between the entities. So I don't know. Again, you're just like what you said. I don't know what was said there. I think the general mistrust of the feds in general down through there and even over through here may have played a role in any mistrust of the Weather Service. But there was a lot of ill will after Audrey. It was the track was forecast pretty well, except it came in faster, but the intensity was completely missed. It was not expected to intensify like it did. So the evacuations weren't called for on that.
Bill, Troy Kimmel here. Good to see you.
Troy.
Hey, I'm looking, I just happened to pull up before the show tonight, what I consider to be sort of the document published by the government after the fact, what we generally, I forget what we call them nowadays, but I'm looking at that and I'm wondering back in those times for either you or for Jeffrey, I see the local statement issued at 11 p.m. by the New Orleans Weather Bureau office. Are these out of New Orleans? Were they a hurricane center, or was it in Miami? And this is sort of like a local action statement that we see nowadays. I guess I was kind of wondering about some of the bureaucracy of maybe the Weather Service at that point.
Right. New Orleans was the hurricane warning office for interests on the Gulf Coast.
Okay.
So Miami handed off the advisories and warning. They had the hurricane hotline type thing. So they were they were still working the storm and talking to the forecaster. But I actually know that I saw the same ones that Clyde Conner, Conner on a couple of those advisories out of New Orleans. He was a brilliant, experiential meteorologist back in that time there, and so yeah, they were the ones responsible.
Because they handed responsibility off on that Saturday morning to New Orleans, and I wonder, Bill, what the role was for the Hurricane Center after that. So they were still forecasting and issuing the track and those sort of things, or what did how did the responsibility shift?
Good question. I think they would probably give them their best estimate, also the guidance, but the ultimate responsibility was still with New Orleans back then, as far as the warnings.
Well, Bill, one thing that I see in this, and I was doing the same thing James was doing. I was in North Mississippi. I think I was going into the 7th grade, and I sat up all night and listened to WWL as well. I remember that. I remember very well that it was a Sunday night. But I'm sitting here, and the hair kind of stands on the back of my head. The next to the last paragraph of the 1 a.m. bulletin from the New Orleans Weather Bureau office says, Keesler Air Force Base at Biloxi reports 20-foot tides and 125 to 150 mile per hour winds at 10:10 p.m. Lakefront Airport in New Orleans reports gusts in excess of 100 miles an hour at 11 p.m. Golly, I remember seeing those sort of things in these statements. It's been a long time since I pulled this up and actually read it. It's pretty amazing.
Yeah, that's a fascinating report, and that's I read last night. That preliminary report lists all of the advisories issued by Miami and New Orleans, and then all the local statements. And Troy, I was struck by the length of those local statements out of New Orleans. They were generally 4 lines long.
Right.
4 lines.
They were aimed at the audio, the rip and read audience.
Yeah.
These long epistles that we put out now mostly go in a trash can. People don't have time to use that stuff. Plus, you were sending them on a teletype, which the public product teletype had all a 25 word a minute.
That's right.
So you didn't have room for all these long products. You were restricted by the communication capability of the day.
And Bill, somewhere over here in one of these file cabinets, many years ago, I was able to get a hold of some of the original teletype surface airway codes products. In other words, the surface observations for Keesler. They're sitting somewhere in a file over here that someone gave me many years ago off the Service A, I guess was what we called it, basically the aviation circuit. But it's really amazing to watch those Keesler observations from Keesler Air Force Base as they continued through the storm pretty much.
Yeah, that's pretty amazing stuff. I would wrestle you for those, Troy, right there.
I just wish I could find them in all the junk back here, but anyway.
Sorry, I'm going to ask a really quick question. I'm interested in what was the content of those really brief advisories when they could only put forward those 4 lines, because it sort of strikes me that we've
would you like me to read you one?
Yeah, well, and we've regressed a little bit in modern technologies too. There's in social sciences, there's a whole group of people trying to optimize how much we can fit into a tweet. We have 140 characters. We have to get things out in little packages again for different technological reasons. But I'm really curious to know what kinds of content they thought were really important to get out.
Now, this is the 4 p.m. statement on Sunday, August 17th from the Weather Bureau in New Orleans. Now, remember, the storm had just gone to 190 miles an hour, at that point. It said at 4 p.m. Central Daylight Time, the center of Hurricane Camille was located by radar 110 miles southeast of New Orleans. Present path speed of movement of this extremely dangerous hurricane indicates the center will pass close to the mouth of the Mississippi River late this afternoon and move inland on the Mississippi coast near Gulfport early tonight. Gale force winds are expected to begin shortly in the New Orleans area, occasionally reaching hurricane force. Scattered squalls tonight. A few severe thunderstorms, possibly accompanied by tornadoes, are expected this afternoon and tonight. Low-lying sections of the greater New Orleans area are likely to be affected by rising water and high tides. All necessary precautions evacuation should be completed immediately. Stay tuned to your radio or television station for the latest hurricane and evacuation information. And that's about 6 lines, but and probably on a teletype it might have been 10 lines, but that was the brevity. that was there.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So they were talking about evacuations in there too. I wonder if you could point to a time when the Hurricane Center per se actually started. Do you know, even before this, where did it originate? Because the Weather Bureau itself only came together as an entity in the 50s, right?
Nominally, the timeline that we use is 1947, when Grady Norton, they moved the hurricane responsibility, I think, from Jacksonville down to Miami, and he was in charge of the hurricane part of the section. But it was the forecast office staff, the regular forecasters, would make up the cadre of people that would put out the bulletins on the hurricanes. They didn't have a separate unit of specialists. I don't know exactly when that transition occurred, but he wasn't called the director of the National Hurricane Center. I think that occurred with Gordon Dunn, that followed him in the 50s.
That's really interesting. Very, very interesting. It's almost hard for us to fathom, what life is like without all of these systems in place that we have and that we rely on today. Very fascinating. I actually was really interested too in your descriptions of the satellite imagery. And when you'd go out to do those recon flights, you'd fly possibly through clear air. At the time, what was the mental model of how hurricanes worked? Because you didn't have routine satellite images. Was it known that hurricanes could sort of wander, or did people think they kind of went in straight lines? Did they think they did loops? What did they think? What did they infer that they did?
By that time, we had almost 20 plus years of recon. So we actually had a pretty good idea on behavioral things like the loops, the stalls of storms, and the rapid intensification. We knew about it, had no idea what caused it yet. Had no skill at forecasting. And some question whether we do today, for that matter.
Yep.
The sheer lack of data is what amazes me when I look back at that era. Is how little data. I mean, it's a total different paradigm than what the forecasters have now. Back then, you had this minimum amount of data that you'd spent 8 hours trying to milk everything out of that to make maybe a good 24-hour forecast. Today, in the first 8 minutes you're on shift, you have more data than you can possibly look at the rest of the shift, and you got to figure out how to organize and sift and dissect all that, distill it, and what's going to happen in the next 7 days. It's amazing how far we've come.
And the story that I read about Curtis Jelesnansky, and y'all probably know this person. I've only ever heard of him, but I know you do.
Yep.
That he went to Dr. Simpson on that Saturday night with output from his experimental model and said, the surge is going to be 25 feet if it hits west of Pascagoula. And that really impacted Dr. Simpson, and it worried him, to go live with that, of information. Comment on that for a second. And
okay. A little background story on that. Doc Simpson, I think he was less than 10 years old growing up in Corpus Christi. In 1919, they had a bayfront house in Corpus Christi, and a hurricane of 1919 was coming at him, and his father decided they didn't need to evacuate. Well, the storm surge came in, and he was carried by his father through a 14-foot storm surge to get inland out of the floodwater. So he had a very personal feel for what storm surge could do just from his life experience as a child. And I think one of the things, prior to Camille, the highest surge they'd measured, and they'd been there since the early 1800s, was about 16 feet. So when Jelesnansky came in with this forecast of 25 feet, I'm sure everybody rolled their eyes back and says, this can't be possible. But because of Doc Simpson's early life experience, he didn't poo-poo it.
I did find, and I've looked at these advisories for 40 years because that preliminary report was a beloved book, at the public library for me. I never noticed that the Hurricane Center and the Weather Service, or the Weather Bureau in Mobile, which I believe must have had responsibility for the Mississippi Gulf Coast, didn't mention tides west of Gulfport. Every single advisory, every single local statement, outside of a few on the afternoon of the 17th from Mobile, where they said tides may be 15 feet above normal near where the hurricane makes landfall. Every geographic point was Gulfport to Pascagoula, Pascagoula to Mobile. And it never mentioned those western communities in Harrison County. Troy, you may have some experience with this, but I wonder if the people in Bay St. Louis, Pass Christian, Waveland, those places did not feel that the hurricane was going to be, or that the storm surge was going to be as bad for them because they didn't hear their communities mentioned. And I don't know the answer to that. Kim, it might be too late to find that answer out, but because I know some studies were done later, but that worries me that, maybe that oversight might have led to some fatalities during that time. Does anybody want to comment on that?
The lack of knowledge of storm surge and the fact that it was really up until most recent decade, it was mostly a one-line statement in the products. It was underplayed, in my opinion, most of my career even, except in places that had an impact. You would not have that happen in the Galveston area, for example, because of the 1900 storm. That was all people asked about, is how high is the storm surge going to be?
Troy, did that ever strike you, that lack of information there for that western county on the Mississippi Gulf Coast?
Well, if you look, I'm in another document now looking at just the places where we were taking surface weather observations at that point. About half the stations, number one, are not 24 hours a day. This is Sunday night at 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock, midnight. And, nowadays, not only we have these, but we have so many supplemental networks out there. We have the Mesonets and things like this. I agree with you, Bill. I mean, people didn't hear their towns being mentioned. Maybe they just didn't feel like it was that big of a risk. I don't know. But it's just like Bill said. I mean, good Lord, the amount of data that we can have in 10 minutes that you would never had an entire day in a Weather Bureau office in those days. So
from what I've read, though, they actually did communicate. The local officials communicated the need to evacuate on the coast of Mississippi for the entire coastal counties of Mississippi, and there was quite a number of people who did actually evacuate in advance of that storm. One of the comments I saw was, "Well, we were listening in New Orleans and they weren't talking about us," and the feedback they got was, "Well, our local radio stations are going full bore on this, telling you what to do."
Well, there was the story that I've always heard, and I heard this from a law enforcement friend many years ago, and whether it's true or not, who really cares? It sounds interesting, was that area, along US Highway 90 there along the coast, if you were anywhere in that area and all the way to the berm, the railroad berm, which is about 6 blocks inland, when you get around Biloxi and that area, they pretty much asked that area to evacuate. And I forget what it was that they had achieved on that Saturday ahead of time. But apparently on Sunday morning, there was a story of a young patrol officer with the Mississippi Highway Patrol at that point that was working down there trying to get people out. And they decided to take fingerprint pads on that Sunday morning out in the patrol cars and go back into that area south of the berm to US Highway 90 and ask them one more time to leave. And when they told them they weren't going to leave, like they asked them, 24 hours ago, you going to leave? No. On that Sunday morning, apparently they said, well, in that case, if you don't mind giving us a set of your fingerprints, give us the name and phone number of your next of kin. They said that actually affected more evacuation along the coast than I think that really, when people start asking you for your name, your next of kin and your finger, it's the thing right now. If you want to stay, get a Mark Salot and write your name, relative's name and phone number on just write it on there. That's what they tell you to do nowadays. This is essentially the same thing back in 1969. And I'm told by some law enforcement officials over there that, it was pretty amazing how some people who on Saturday were not going to leave decided on Sunday to leave very quickly.
And that would get your attention. Yeah. You mentioned emergency management, Bill Reed, about, it wasn't then what it is now, but Wade Geis and his wife, Julia, they were doing amazing things that weekend.
Well, it was a bill. And I mean, this was all civil defense. That's what they called it back in. It was civil defense. And whether or not people followed their advice, I don't really remember that much about it. But it's a long version back of where we are in emergency management and Homeland Security in 2019.
Yeah, I think what had happened in Audrey and then again with Betsy is really influenced the Geises and led to them actually having plans for a natural disaster. Because, like I said, it was civil defense and it was Cold War, and everybody was having to make plans for what happens if there's a nuclear attack, and the natural disasters were kind of second shelved on that.
Bill, one thing that I think is interesting, that, correct me if I'm wrong, but in those days, that the first version, the WSR 57, that was in Boothville, right? Or was it?
Yeah.
Okay. I always kind of wondered about that. I guess that was a good location for it if you're going to get a tropical storm. But on the other hand, where's the first place to lose all communications? Boothville. But I always thought that was interesting when the radar was located there.
Yeah, for sure. And I thought the neat thing was that the Geises were fighting the local county government on that Saturday to prepare for evacuation. And they said, look, we don't want to evacuate unnecessarily. We'll have egg on our face. This thing ends up in Fort Walton. And they said, you can't lose here. If the hurricane goes east, we win. Yep. We've gone through a great preparedness drill. If the hurricane does come here, we're going to save thousands of lives. And that turned out to
I think something we really, really, really desperately needed was a WSR 57 down in Central Virginia for the second chapter of this storm. And there was none down there, nowhere near there. And that was to the great detriment of being able to provide warnings for people in Central Virginia for the second phase of this storm.
That's a good segue right there, Jeff. Why don't you walk us through, Dr. John, throw in some your contributions too, to the impact of Camille there in Nelson County and the surrounding areas there in Virginia.
This was the ultimate sneak attack on Central Virginia from a tropical storm. 95% of storms that have ever hit Virginia have recurved in a very classic pattern where they come in from the southeast and then they come up from the south and then they head back off towards the northeast. Coastal regions, the Piedmont will pick up some brief but heavy rains. Now this system now comes in from the Ohio Valley 2.5 days after landfall, and it was just a tropical depression on the synoptic chart, and it was only producing 1 to 3 inches locally as it was coming across the Ohio Valley. And, the official total, if you go back to the classic paper that came out in 1970 by an author by the name of Schwartz, who worked for the Weather Bureau at the time, 27 inches in Nelson County. But I am very certain, because I've gotten to know the people in that county quite well, and I know that the son of the sheriff, Bill Whitehead, his name is Dick Whitehead, who's made it one of his missions in life is to figure out just how much rain fell where, that we're talking at least 30 inches. And I can confidently state that in more than one location down there in Nelson County in the space of 8 hours. Now you do the math, you divide 8 into 30 inches, and what do you come up with for an hourly rain rate? Something on the order of 3 to 4 inches down there per hour, sustained for 8 hours. So the big question has always been, why did this thing roar back to life? The lion had become a pussycat, and the pussycat became a tiger once again over Central Virginia. And we know from the work that this fellow Schwartz did that there were synoptic conditions. There was a stationary front that dropped down out of Northern Virginia and draped itself from west to east across Central Virginia. You had orographic uplift from the mountains. You had the tropical depression itself approaching from the west, and you had a jet streak in the upper atmosphere. And this comes from Bob Simpson, my discussions with him. It was that wonderful right entrance region quadrant of the jet streak that sat itself over Central Virginia. But you know what? Those conditions in and of themselves are not going to get you 30 inches of rainfall over such a small area. And so you have to look at the convective scales. And from what I've looked at with the very, very, very sparse radar we have, and this radar is 800 miles away. This is, from Washington Dulles, it's from Pittsburgh. You're just looking at the very tops of these clouds. But I'll tell you what, for 5-6 hours, those cloud features didn't move. They were anchored to that terrain. There was a mesoscale thunderstorm complex that was anchored against the east slopes of that terrain. And those storm cells, those convective cells, were training. They were popping up along the east slopes and moving off to the east. And they were dropping 1 to 2 inches as they moved over the same locations. And this was going on for 8 hours down there. This was a locked system, part of the system. A lot of people assume, well, the storm was stationary, it stalled. It didn't stall. We know from the Schwartz analysis that the tropical depression was moving. But a portion of it, north of its center, a convective complex was anchored up against the terrain. And that is my hypothesis that explains why you could get 30 inches in the space of 8 hours.
We probably wouldn't forecast it much better today than they did then.
Yeah.
If that was the driving mechanism, that'd be very difficult.
Yeah, we don't have the models that can get you to the resolution that can pick up, echo training within these mesoscale complexes. But we would have had the radar. I think we would have had better radar depiction. You look at Madison County, which flooded really bad back in 2005. Now that's about 40 miles north of there. That's north of Charlottesville. And Madison County picked up 25 inches of rain in June of 2005 in the space of 12 or so hours. And that was a flood that was very comparable to the Camille flood. Now, it was not a tropical system. This was just a thunderstorm complex that was stuck up there on the east slopes of those mountains. And now we had the benefit of the next rad up in Dulles that caught that, right? But Dr. John will tell you that WSR 57 at Volans, Virginia, was put in after Camille, so this location would never be in a blind spot again. John, do you remember going down to that Volans site?
Oh, Jeff, that was many years ago.
Yeah. What's it called? South Boston, Virginia?
South Boston.
That's it, yeah. But that went in as a result of Camille because they were in such a blind spot. They were literally beneath the horizon in terms of any nearby radars. They were literally in the dark down there. The Weather Bureau forecast for that night was showers clearing in the morning. That was it. That's what people went to bed thinking was going to happen down there.
Right.
And 30 inches in 8 hours.
140 people lost their lives.
That's right.
Oh, I was going to ask what the impacts were of that. What were the hours where the rain fell? It sounds like, was that an overnight event then?
Yeah,
they went to bed.
It was sunrise to sunset.
The witnesses claimed that the sky was blue all night long because of the constant lightning that developed. And Nelson County is on a main route from South Central Virginia right into Charlottesville. So at that time, if you were traveling north on 29 and you were commuting into Charlottesville, you were using this highway that went right through Nelson County. So there were many residents and many businesses in Charlottesville that didn't open that day because there was nobody there. So the question then became early on, why isn't anybody traveling north on State Route 29? Eventually, they sent some people from Charlottesville south on 29, and they realized, well, the road is gone. It is completely gone. So that's why no one was traveling north. And there's a lot of anecdotal history about this storm. Entire families were lost when their homes were washed away. I mentioned 140 fatalities, many of which were never recovered. They were washed away. And from a geological perspective, which is actually where I got my initial interest, when you look at the Blue Ridge Mountains down there, we're talking 50 years ago, they are still down to the bedrock, where that rainfall took away all the vegetation and just left the underlying bedrock, which is still there today.
Yeah, these are called flood chutes, and you see these dark gray strips running vertically down the sides of these mountains down there. And, you know, as John said, you've probably had more than 1,000 years worth of erosion that took place in the space of 8 hours down there. And it's very true that it took about 24 hours to get the word out that there had been this catastrophe down there, because think about it, all the radio communications facilities were absolutely wiped out by the flooding down there. So they could not get the word out of this county to the emergency facilities, to the federal government, to the military, that, you know, they got people up in the tops of trees clinging for their lives still, people on rooftops, and just the highest vertical point you could climb to get away from not just the rising water, but the trillions of tons of soil and rock and forest and living things that came down off of those mountains that night. This was the worst possible time a flood of this magnitude could have hit, because it's pitch dark. All you hear is the constant roar of the rain. Now, as Dr. John said, there was the constant flickering of the lightning, which was beneficial, because you could see these streams rising very quickly. But it was actually the sense of smell that saved at least one family, because there's one fellow down there who gave an interview, and he said he never smelled the odor of pine sap so strong in the air that night. And he figured it was all the millions of trees that were breaking and snapping and coming down in those landslides that filled the air with that aroma of this organic sap. And he said, that's what saved my life. He said, I knew I had to get to high ground.
So how localized was the flooding? It sounds like for people who were able to get out of the way, there were people able to get out of the way. So it wasn't just a wide aerial flood. It mostly stuck to river streams.
Well, this was a very narrow strip that ran west to east to cut right across the Blue Ridge Mountains. There was very bad flooding on both sides, even on the west side of the mountains, out near Buena Vista and those areas out there. They picked up 15, 20 inches on the west side, but the true ground zero was Nelson County, Virginia. And for a lot of folks, there was absolutely no way out. You could not leave, because the roads, the bridges, everything was completely gone. Yeah. It was just removed.
So how did we measure that kind of rainfall? How do you think that happened?
Well, like I said,
we know the answer, Jeff.
I've looked at years worth of and talking with people down there, and we've got direct evidence of people that had these 36-inch tall 30-inch tall oak barrels in the back of their pickup truck down there, and who swore up and down they were bone dry the night before the storm. The next morning they were filled to the brim. Now that's 30 inches from bottom to top inside these oak barrels. And the Weather Bureau back then had protocols for verifying, and you got to interview and you got to look at and all this and whatnot. And I really do believe when I hear an account like that it's going to be credible. But just to think that a convective system is capable of something like that is, the air feeding into that convective system, the dew points were extremely high. We know this from this Schwartz paper, that those dew points were 76 to 78 degrees Fahrenheit. Now that is some very, very humid air. And why that air was so humid was it was a very, very wet summer down there. So it was a lot of antecedent rainfall for weeks. The soil was saturated and evaporating like crazy into that air mass. And so this is like loading a keg with black powder. And you say, okay, what's the spark that's going to come set this thing off? Well, it was what was left of Camille. Even 2.5 days after landfall, I suspect there was a lot of spin energy above 5,000 feet left over on that system. Cat 5 just doesn't go down that fast and go kaput. there was probably a lot of vorticity up there, a lot of upper atmospheric dynamics still in play. And we couldn't sample it because of the spacing of the sounding network back then. This thing really, really was deceptively still very strong and still very much had a card to play up her sleeve as she came over those mountains.
You talk about antecedent conditions. I had pulled some of the weather station data in the month before Camille, and widespread rainfall in July was anywhere from 8 to 11 inches in the entire region.
So Aubrey, that's exactly the type of good data sleuthing that we need to kind of reconstruct, not just the event itself, but the lead into this event. So good on you to come up with that type of data.
Well, one of our emergency managers had found a picture of flooding in Harrisonburg and thought it was from Camille. And I said, Harrisonburg only picked up about an inch from Camille. And when I started looking back, that's when I figured out, and I popped up a bunch of weather stations, and it was widespread. It was not isolated.
Yeah.
So what lessons have we learned here that can apply to 2019 if we have another Category 5 hurricane coming up in the Gulf Coast?
Well, let me say this, never trust a post-tropical remnant anywhere in the United States. We have seen time and time again, these systems that are a day, 2, 3 days, having come inland, still have cards to play up their sleeve. It all depends on what type of baroclinic systems they're interacting with, the jet stream, topography. Look at Agnes, for goodness sakes, Agnes 1972. This storm hit the Florida Peninsula as a Cat 1 in June. It was an early season storm and did not unleash its heaviest rainfall until 2 to 3 days later up over Pennsylvania, right over where Dr. John lives these days. That place got dumped on by 15 to 20 inches of rain 3 days after landfall, right? Hurricane Ivan, 2004, comes into Florida, does a number on Florida. Sure, storm surge, high wind, and then gets over Northern Virginia and drops over 50 tornadoes 3 days after landfall, right? Just down to a tropical. 50 tornadoes, folks, a tornado swarm came out of this thing. The point I'm making here is you cannot trust a post-tropical system. Everyone is focused on what happens at landfall, and rightly so, but you can't write the damn things off once they're done with landfall. There can be amazing things lurking in the next few days, and you got to be careful because each one of these things is going to be different.
Yep. Totally agree. All right, we have to take a quick break here. We're going to do Tony Rice and the Astronomy Report. We're going to come back with our picks of the week, the weather roundup, and much more as Weather Brains rolls along. Y'all stay with us now.
Looking beyond the atmosphere, here's Tony Rice with your Astronomy Outlook.
Last week, it was Jupiter cozying up to the moon. But tonight, August 12th, it's Saturn's turn, just 6 degrees away from the nearly full moon rising in the southeast. Through the rest of the week, the moon will move about 10 degrees eastward each evening, but Saturn will stay right beside another site that's worth taking a look at, the Teapot in Sagittarius. Look for a triangle of stars on top forming the lid, 2 trapezoids forming the body and the handle, and another triangle pointing upward forming the spout. The tip of that spout points right into the brighter portions of the Milky Way, our galaxy. From particularly dark areas, the northwesternly arc of the Milky Way even looks a bit like steam rising off the teapot. The teapot is an asterism. Other asterisms you may already know include the Big Dipper in the constellation Ursa Major, the Great Bear, the Little Dipper formed by the brightest stars of Ursa Minor, the Little Bear, and the Great Square formed by the body of Pegasus. Now, an asterism is a recognizable pattern formed by stars. While that sounds a lot like the definition of a constellation, asterisms aren't exactly constellations. They're smaller and usually found within constellations. The Summer Triangle even spans Aquila, Cygnus, and the Lyra constellations. And while they're probably even more popularly known, asterisms aren't officially recognized. The scientific community, specifically the International Astronomical Union, adopted the set of modern constellations in their meeting back in 1928, made up of 42 animals, 29 inanimate objects, 17 humans, and mythological creatures. The 88 modern constellations serve as neighborhoods in the sky that astronomers use as a reference, initially to aid the naming of new stars. Now, while you're out taking a look at Saturn and the teapot, turn to the north, and you might catch a Perseid meteor or two. While this is normally one of the most active meteor showers of the year, with dozens of meteors visible under good conditions, this year, most meteors are going to get lost in the bright moonlight. The best time to see the most meteors, though, will be tomorrow morning, August 13th, between about 4:30 and 6:30 local time, after moonset, but before sunrise. That's your Astronomy Outlook. Follow me in RTP Hokie for more spacey stuff like this.
Oh, Aubrey, do we need to do an email segment this week?
While
you're looking, I'm just going to play the music anyway because there just might be something to read in there.
Letters. We get letters. We get stacks and stacks of letters.
All right, that one was from last week. What's today's date? There we go. Okay. This one is from Kevin from LA. Wanted to take the time to thank you all for your help, advice, and of course the rants, the famous rants. As of this week, I've completed the final class I need for my bachelor's from Mississippi State's distance program. I can now finally say I'm a meteorologist thanks to you and the rest of the Weather Brains crew. My eyes have been open to the television forecasters as a career opportunity. So isn't that pretty exciting?
Woohoo!
We made a difference.
That's a
in
great
someone's life.
Great story.
That's kind of scary. Congratulations, Kevin. That is awesome. And then this one comes in from Austin, another positive remark. I started listening to the show last summer and have listened ever since. I emailed about a year ago asking how to stay in weather after changing my major from meteorology, and am now graduating from the University of Oklahoma with a degree in sociology in December. And after listening so much, I realized I wanted to pursue emergency management. So Austin is applying to the University of North Texas Emergency Management and Disaster Service Master's Program. So how exciting. So that's pretty cool. And asked for some advice. And I believe, Kim, you reached out to Austin. So that's pretty exciting. And then this one came in from Robert Keel. I don't know if you guys have done a show on Red Cross preparedness and disaster response, but this past storm season, I was involved with a Red Cross group called Proactive Disaster Assistance Response, and would maybe like to talk about it on the show sometime. So that sounds kind of interesting. So maybe we'll reach out to Robert. And that is all the email activity that I have. So if you have a cool email or some interesting information you'd like to send us, email at weatherbrains.com. If you have a guest suggestion, please include some contact information for our guest booking officer. He appreciates it very much. And email at weatherbrains.com. We'd love to hear from you.
When the weather ball is red, warmer weather is ahead. When the weather ball is white, colder weather is in sight. When the weather ball is green, no change in the weather is foreseen. When colors blink by night or day, precipitation's on the way.
We are doing this show on August 12th, 2019. Time for a weather roundup. We're going to go around the horn here. And Troy, let's start with you out in the land of the heat, the blazing inferno. How hot is it? How hot has it been?
Well, we got up officially, James, in Austin today to 105 at Camp Mabry. That's our in-city first-order climate site. And then out at Austin Bergstrom International Airport, not quite as long a period of record out there, but it got to 101 out there today. But as Bill mentioned a little earlier, being a little further west, the dew points come down a little bit. So I think the max heat stress number that I saw around here this afternoon was no more than about 109 or 10. So it wasn't as bad as some of the places in the southeast over toward James. Particularly in northeast Mississippi, talked to friend up in Tupelo today, and amazing heat stress numbers in the Magnolia State today. So not as bad here. We're expecting a disturbance to kind of come in and maybe a few thunderstorms tomorrow, actually Wednesday into Thursday, with a little bit of a microburst threat, I think. So once that passes, high pressure builds back in once again, and we're back to more summer. Oh, goody.
Bill Reed, you are down in the Galveston area, so you must be oppressive as well.
Oh yeah, we've been humming along with our dew points in the morning are just below 80, and the morning lows have been at my house have been 81, 82, and mixes all the way down to 75 in the afternoon for a dew point. But that's not that atypical. If we're going to get a heat wave to warning criteria on the heat, it's the first 2 weeks of August is pretty high probability of that.
Hey, Bill, one thing before you leave, which I think is amazing. If y'all didn't hear about this, I know Bill knows about it. Earlier in the week, Bill, and I don't remember what day it was, at Palacios and at Galveston, we had overnight lows at both those locations of 86 or 87. That was the overnight low at Palacios and Galveston. That's the warmest overnight low temperature ever recorded, the period of record for both Palacios and Galveston ever.
So Troy, without a heat burst, I mean, just on it?
No, that was just the overnight low with these dew points that Bill is talking about.
Yeah.
Air you can wear. Let's work our way up the eastern seaboard up here. Jeff, it looks like you got some pretty active storms coming through there tomorrow, right? You got an enhanced risk?
We're a little nervous tomorrow. You know, I do a lot of work with Capital Weather Gang and do a lot of writing with them, and as their severe storms expert. And you know, we're looking at a frontal boundary coming down and a wave coming through with a good short wave in the jet stream. Anyway, the thing is, you know, these heat waves sometimes don't break without a little bit of violence. And what we're wrestling with is whether we're going to get an advanced line of showers and cloud coming through in the morning hours, late morning to early afternoon, that may shut us down. If you get enough of that cloud cover early in the day, you're not going to destabilize much in the afternoon. And so there's good shear in the atmosphere, but if we don't get destabilized, we're not going to realize those storms. And so we're going to be in a difficult position to try to figure out late tomorrow morning what exactly the hell is going to happen here tomorrow evening. I know Dr. John's dealing with some of that enhanced threat up in southern PA as well.
Yeah, Jeff, the same ideas were going through my mind today was whether we'll get any of this leftover debris from the activity right now that's producing a flood risk or immediate flood hazard right now in Illinois. So we'll see tomorrow morning, maybe a scattered shower here, cloud cover. I think wouldn't surprise me if that enhanced risk is actually sagged a little south by tomorrow. We're not going to have the updraft rotation that I think you guys have the potential for. So I think tomorrow we get some storms around here with the dew points once again back towards 70 degrees. Yeah, there could be some heavy rainers.
Yep.
Aubrey, where do you fit in with all this?
Man, they said it. It's exactly what I've been grappling with, tonight. What does this morning convection do? How strong is this morning line going to be, and the effect on the rest of the day? And we're actually already starting to get some light showers in, and I watched my dew point rise about 8 degrees in the last 4 hours or so. I came in from editing my Camille piece, and the dew point was 58 when I went out there, and I came back and it was 66. So it's shooting up there. So we're getting the moisture already.
So let's work our way over to Kim. So Kim, looks like you had some pretty nasty heat in central Oklahoma today.
Gosh, yeah, we have for a couple of days now. It's been we've been pretty well baked. It's gotten over 100 degrees for a couple days in a row here in Norman, with heat indices that were not enviable, but we're looking to get cooler with the disturbance Troy mentioned. So we should be cooling down a little bit tonight. Only in the 90s tomorrow. It's going to be great. We might actually see the 70s again in overnight lows. And you were talking about the record-breaking low temperatures. I feel like this is something that it's part of the conversation with people who are monitoring changes in climate. And this is something I'll preview John, his pick. It's something in that report that's detailed quite a bit. But I think it's something that it's kind of hard to grapple with. You think about the night being cool. It's not going to be the record-breaking high of the day. But if you can't get cool at night, that's where we start to see more of the health effects in the population, and also for agriculture and for the stress of every living thing. So as much as these things don't seem like the sexy, it's now 113 degrees, record-breaking high, they're just as important. So very interesting to see this happening with this event. And this is happening very frequently across the country, these kinds of records, the nighttime minimum temperatures. It's just not getting cool at night.
Kev, what's going on in Wichita Falls?
I'm right in between Troy and Kim there. So just watching. It's been quiet. The 500 millibar ridge has been flirting with us. It comes into the Panhandle and then it dodges back toward the Four Corners. And then it comes back and forth and back and forth. But it looks like it's flattening out now. And we got a front just off to our north, a little weak one that'll limp in here tomorrow. And actually hopeful for some scattered storms and actually something to watch for a change, because it's been quiet here. We did 105 here today too in Wichita Falls.
It was a cool 99 in my market today, so that's not bad. Like that. So Bill Murray, you can make some comments on the heat down here, but also let's plug the Weather Fest at NWA.
Yeah, we're excited. Number one, next week, Greg Stumpf will join us, and he's working on the Ron, which we will be broadcasting from on that Monday night, James, when we're in Huntsville on Monday, September the 9th. We'll have Nate Tanner with us next week from Delta Airlines. See, that's going to be a great show also. But that September 7th, that Saturday from 10 to 4, we're going to have a fantastic public event. The National Weather Association Foundation having our fourth annual Weather Ready Fest. It's always in conjunction with the NWA annual meeting. And we currently have, we're going to be around 35 exhibitors, about 25 large vehicles. WAFF is our presenting sponsor. USAA has stepped in as our main sponsor to make the event possible. It's at UAH in the Charger Student Union and the Shelby Building. We're going to have tours of the National Weather Service. We're going to have tours of the Swirl facility. A great lineup of speakers, including our own James Spann, if he can work out his commitment with the NCAA and get there for that day. We're going to fly him up on one of those planes with a parachute, James, just to let drop you out on the way by. So it's going to be a great day. We got great stage shows. Nick Walker from the Weather Channel will be joining us. Expecting about 5,000 people. If you'll go to weatherreadyfest.com, you get a free time ticket. It's timed only for one reason, because we want to make sure we're prepared and stage everybody out as best we can. And we'll look forward to seeing you in Huntsville at that free event on Saturday the 7th. James will be signing his book there too. We're really excited about that.
And let's stress, Bill, that this is not for NWA members. This is for anybody interested in weather, and that's everybody.
That's right. Southern Tennessee, Northern Alabama, Central Alabama, North Georgia, North Mississippi, head on over, because they're going to be, great people that you can learn from there, great things you can take away, just to make your family better prepared for that next disaster, like the ones we've been talking about tonight.
And if you have kids that love weather, this is just a rare chance that an NWA annual meeting doesn't come into your market just every day. This doesn't happen that often. So if you have kids that love weather, and I hear from so many moms and dads, they say, I've got a middle school kid, a high school kid that loves weather. Bill, this is an opportunity for them to actually look people in the eyes that are in the weather enterprise and talk with them and get some advice and kind of get hooked into this thing.
Yeah, I think it's one of those events where, kids walk away and it could be a life-changing experience for them. We've seen it happen, at all the events, St. Louis, at Norfolk, in Orange County. The kids' eyes just light up, and they get so excited. And the folks on the Weather Enterprise side, their eyes light up and they get excited because we don't get an opportunity to go out and talk to our publics like this, each and every day. A lot of times we're talking through a filter, and here it's one-on-one, pounding the flesh and talking to parents and talking to children.
Awesome. All right. So I am the lead story on the late news over here. Got to go do some heat tips. So, Bill, I'm going to we'll do pick of the week, and then we'll wrap this up. My pick before I go, it's Marshall Shepard, our friend, wrote a piece in Forbes about why does NOAA, the National Weather Service, not have an app. I picked that just for you, Kevin. It was I thought of you when I picked that piece. But again, that the links will be on the on weatherbrains.com. So on that note, Bill, the floor belongs to you. I'll let you wrap up the picks of the week around the horn here.
Thank you, James. Now I'll come to you last, Jeff, because I didn't give you a warning about this pick of the week. Unless you've been watching the show, you probably weren't aware of that. Dr. John, I bet you got a great pick of the week.
Yeah, Bill, it just came out as the AMS publication, State of the Climate 2018. If you have just a couple of minutes, read the executive summary. I think it will be very interesting for you.
Outstanding. Thank you, Dr. John. Great to have your insight on tonight's history and event, and good to see you back fresh from vacation.
Oh, thanks, Bill.
Glad you're here tonight. Kim, what you got for us?
Yeah, so it's a little bit different tonight. It's a piece, a blog from the Nuclear Energy Institute, and they actually talk a little bit about nuclear power plants and how compared against other kinds of energy sources, they tend to be more resilient and reliable during natural disasters. So thought it was just an interesting thought piece, and put it out there for people to read. Nuclear energy has a lot of pros and cons and active debate discussion, but it turns out that there could be this interesting upside people might not be aware of.
Outstanding. Thank you for sharing that, Kim. Aubrey, I'll jump to you just in case. Can you talk?
Yes. I'm about to get into shows. Yep. So mine is called Turbulent Skies. Somehow I found it tonight on Twitter. It is an artist who paints based on photos from either storm sea chases or photos from some of the friends that he gets. And it's an incredible website. You can buy his stuff. But a little known fact, I'm actually an artist. So I have a great appreciation, not just for the arts, but also for weather and, the arts together. So it's actually really cool, some of his paintings that he does.
His stuff's really cool. I've seen him for years.
Yeah, really interesting stuff.
Outstanding, Aubrey. Thank you so much for recommending Jeff to be on the show tonight. That was an outstanding call. Troy Kimmel,
He's the one. I was wondering who put the bug in your ear. Aubrey.
Oh, yes.
I'm the one that's always saying, don't forget about Virginia with Camille. Don't forget about Virginia.
Exactly. So, Troy, what's your pick of the week?
Speaking of Jeffrey, just to mention his colleagues up at the Capital Weather Gang, Jason Samnow, I happened to catch this earlier today. Jason did an article today, which is about a new weather app called Climacell. And Dr. John and I kind of shared this. And in fact, I shared it with the gang. It's an interesting read in the Capital Weather Gang today. I guess my sentence is the one that Dr. John and I communicated on just a bit. And it comes from Luke Peffers, who is Climacell's senior vice president. And this is a precipitation app. It was short-term modeling, which is refreshed constantly. And the quote of the night is, "We're blowing the pants off of HRRR." So that's interesting to me. It's worth a look, I guess. And I like Jason's article on this. And again, that's part of the Capital Weather Gang.
Outstanding, Troy. So we'll get a little verification there, huh?
Yeah, exactly. That's what Dr. John and I want. You see the nods there. So
there we go. Kevin, what you got anything for us tonight in the way of a pick of the week?
I don't have one weather related, so of course I would default to ranting about social media. An article about Facebook. Facebook's dangling another carrot in front of broadcasters, so it's another cautionary tale in front of broadcasters. But they claim to, I guess, for the time being, larger news organizations that they want to pay them for some of their material. But as we've seen time and time again, they dangle the carrot and they offer something, and everybody runs to accommodate that, and then they rug out from under them at some point later. So we'll just this is the rug going under again. And at some point we'll look for it to be pulled out.
There you go. And one of the lines in the article said Facebook is eating the world.
Yes.
Still happening. All right. So now my pick of the week, I'm gonna defer to Jeff first, because I'm gonna go where he doesn't go here. Jeff,
you really blindsided me on this one. I wasn't anticipating this pick of the week thing, but because I'm so plugged into Capital Weather Gang, a great colleague at the Weather Gang, new guy. He just came in, Matthew Capucci. He's meteorologist out of Harvard. Anyway, He wrote a great story about this lady's toilet that exploded because of a lightning strike. You got to go read this on the Capital Weather Gang, folks. It hit some type of pipe outside the house, and there's a picture of this toilet. It's like in a million pieces. It totally destroyed the inside. Thank goodness she wasn't sitting on it.
Yeah. It's something you can't unsee.
Yeah. Sounds like a show title.
Lightning does weird stuff. And
Yes.
it's probably one of the most bizarre things I've ever seen a picture of in my life.
Well, Jeffrey, I will tell y'all something. Down here in Central Texas, a few years back, we have a Williamson County Sheriff's deputy, a motorcycle officer that was actually on a toilet, and lightning came in, knocked him completely across the room. He survived, but it actually hit the plumbing and came through the toilet and hit him in the butt.
Okay.
Yep.
Kim,
Well, I'll tell you, you guys you ask my husband. Whenever there's lightning around, I do not allow. I don't allow him near any fixtures. I unplug all the things. Lightning, you just don't mess with it. When I'm chasing, I am a safety officer about lightning. I am not afraid of the tornado because that I can navigate around.
Kim, can you tell us if exploding toilets is in the impact-based warning pipeline?
Strangely enough, that isn't something I've seen as part of the any HESIMP improvements or IBW, but you could propose it. Yeah.
I'm gonna put
Kevin, you go ahead and do that.
Yeah. Put your
Kevin, go ahead.
signature on the program. You could contribute.
Yeah.
If I could, and actually, I'm sad that James had to drop his pick and just run. Could we talk about it for just 30 seconds?
Talk about it. Yeah, absolutely.
Very interestingly, over the last couple of months, I'd started to notice some folks in the Weather Service, anytime the question would arise, why doesn't the Weather Service have its own app? They would, me or others, we would post something about it's the non-compete clause. It's that there was already a private sector that was creating apps and we couldn't compete with them. And I guess there's another conversation that started, or they're being trained that it's really about cost, which I guess is a related concern, but there's been this explosion I'm starting to see on social media of pushback against that, oh no, it's not this public-private competition thing. It's really just that we haven't been appropriated the funds to do it. Yeah. I think the article that Marshall wrote helps to clarify that. And interestingly enough, just last night, I was starting to dig around because I've been in meetings, where it's been discussed. There was an academies meeting where they brought in the FCC and FEMA, and they were talking about redoing, I think it was one text alerts. They were thinking of making them 360 characters instead of, the 180 or whatever. And they discussed the roles and how we're piggybacking off of FEMA's infrastructure and so on. And I just thought, I'm not insane. This is a public-private thing. Yeah. And I found it was Capital Weather Gang. They wrote up the best piece that we found, and they detail a memo Laura Fergione sent to all the employees saying cease and desist order was given in 2012. And it's my understanding, and I'd love if the listening audience has any more documentation. It's my understanding that was just never lifted. Yeah. And so we continue under this.
Well, Kim, one thing that I know is back in March when Bruce Thomas and I were in Starkville for that Southeast Regional Severe Weather Conference, we were lucky enough to be able to have dinner with Louis Usolini. And I actually brought up the app thing because if you look at the mission, I don't care about the Weather Service should have had an app a long time ago. There's not a government agency other than the Weather Service that doesn't have an app. Bottom line mission statement for the Weather Service: general forecasts, watches, warnings, and statements. The Weather Service could set up a great app to be able to do that. I believe they could, although lately I don't know if I'm very trusting of the Weather Service and their technological ability. As much as chat has been down lately, as some other things have been down, it's been a serious problem. And even I've actually talked to James up at Capital Weather Gang about this. It's a serious problem in the Weather Service, the technical issues. But I think they ought to have it. I believe that Weather Service ought to have an app that would serve their mission statement, which is warnings, watches, advisories at this point, and general forecast. They shouldn't have to worry about private sector.
It's a hard
You only
line.
brought this up a long time ago, Kevin. You know, we could have done something about it.
I would rant on it, but we just started our 10 o'clock news, so I can't yell, unfortunately.
Yeah. Go ahead,
Well-
Kevin. Go ahead.
You know, for people who are interested, yeah, Kevin, you can rant just softly. Use your soft rant tones. But for people who are interested in the arguments, the article that James links to some of the documents that kind of show both sides of the argument. They're the Weather Service Employees Organization, so basically the union, was arguing that exact thing, that the American taxpayer pays for the forecasts, so they should be able to receive them. And that should occur through whatever means. They shouldn't have to pay more to get an app. This is a tough thing. There are some really great apps that the private sector has developed. I do understand and appreciate that that difficulty and that challenge. And it, in part, it arose because, and this is where I think it's really important to have an accurate understanding of why we have to mind this line. We're part of the Department of Commerce in NOAA, and that comes with very specific issues. If we were Interior, it's my understanding that this wouldn't be a difficulty, but because it's Department of Commerce that we were placed under, primarily because of fisheries interests, when we were joined with them and then swept under Commerce, it's my understanding that because of that, the Department of Commerce has this non-compete clause with the private sector because, of course, the business development side of it. So, yeah, it's just an incidental kind of oops.
Yeah. Well, I think
bureaucratic oops.
Kim, I think it's interesting. I think in that same article, they mentioned that Environment Canada just came out with an amazing app, apparently for people in Canada. And, you know, to me, that's sort of embarrassing for the National Weather Service.
It's tough. There's not a lot that they can do about it. Again, just this is my understanding, unless we were under a different department.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
Well, thank you for
But I
that
think that's-
outstanding
sorry, go ahead.
discussion. Kim, go ahead, Kim.
Oh, I was just going to
Finish
say,
your
that's
sentence.
why it's important to understand the real reason behind it. Because if you are really interested in, you know, and frustrated by that, I think you have to understand just how much it would take to change it. And it would take something that Herculean.
And Kevin, is it okay to say what you said in chat right there? Give me he said, you know, he's in show, but the Marshall piece doesn't mention AccuWeather and Company. I would suggest
No,
this
that's exactly
isn't
right.
budgeted business as a smokescreen. We don't have the money as a tougher line to fight at the foundation without an NWS app. They're not serving their primary mission of protecting life. So
It is the
Or
word.
protesting
AccuWeather
life.
is the word. Yeah.
Protesting life, as Kevin wrote. I think he meant protecting life, Kevin. Protesting life works too. So we spend a lot of our time protesting. So anyway, great discussion. Thank you. We'll continue. Watch that. And we'll have Marshall Shepard on the show on September 23rd. And not specifically for that, but it'll be a great topic to bring up with him. And Jeff, since you didn't use it, I'm going to use the Schwartz paper because I think that's a pretty interesting AMS journal entry that everyone can access. And that'll be my pick of the week. I think probably the most interesting thing I see there is the Nashville sounding from that morning, and I think the sounding from Huntington almost look like the Sheets modified hurricane sounding that day. That was an amazing air mass that we were dealing with. Any comments on that before we go?
No,
you
Jeff.
muted yourself, Jeff. So unmute thyself.
Yeah, that's the only paper that really came out to look at the Camille environment in its post-tropical phase. And, you know, it's all we really have to go on. And that's from 1970. It's not really been nothing since then. And what we really need to do is get a paper together that looks at the convective to mesoscale processes, because he just looked at the synoptic scale factors that came together. But we know that you're not going to get 30 inches out of synoptics alone. You have to have a convective scale process going on. And that's my take on that.
And in this case, you need terrain also.
Absolutely. Yep.
So if anyone's sitting around thinking about what their paper is going to be for the National Weather Association annual meeting in Tulsa next year, there's a topic right
It's a
there.
great master's thesis. Hint, hint, hint.
So if any of your students are watching, hopefully they picked up on that.
Right.
Hey, Bill, I'd like to leave you with one more picture. We often take a look at sunrises or sunset over water. Check this one out. This is actually a double rainbow over Seneca Lake.
Wow.
Oh, wow.
Not often you see that.
John, where is Seneca Lake in relation to is it one of the Finger Lakes or is it next to it?
Yes, Jeff, it is one of the main Finger Lakes. It's one of the longest. It's over 600 feet deep in the center.
Wow. All right.
That is an amazing stat, and it's been an amazing show. Thank you, Jeff, for joining us tonight. Thank you, everybody, for taking a walk back through memory lane to look at Hurricane Camille and the impact of that devastating storm. But Weather Brains is the weekly netcast all about weather. We do it on Monday nights generally. We'll be back next Monday night with Nate Tanner from Delta Airlines, along with Greg Stump. Who'll be talking about the Ron at the upcoming annual meeting of the National Weather Association. Until we get together next Monday night, as I always say, for the whole Weather Brains crew here, keep an eye to the sky because you'll always have something fun to look at. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, Jeff. It's been great.
Yeah, thank you, Jeff. This is outstanding. We'll have you.
Thanks,
We'll
everyone.
schedule you a show here, maybe October 14th. Write it down.
Okay.
I'll put you on the calendar.
All right.
We'll walk back through the greatest highlights columns of your career.
Well, I'd like to talk about derechos, and that's what I look at in the east of the Mississippi. So that will be a great topic.
Right.
Awesome. That'll be perfect. All right. Well, y'all have a great week.
You too.
Take care.
Bye, everyone.
Hey, guys, I got to run quick. Thank you all for watching. We'll see you all next week for Weather Brains. Bye-bye, everybody.